From the time we are born, our lives are crafted with stories. Stories we hear, read, and stories we tell ourselves. These stories shape our lives, our future, and our potential. Sometimes, a single story can pivot us from a downward spiral to a transformative paradigm shift. Our struggles in life are rooted in the stories we choose to believe. It's a delicate balance between being realistic and maintaining hope for a brighter future. But unfortunately, many people end up abandoning their dreams, all because of self-imposed beliefs and a limiting mindset. The Greatest Story podcast exists to bring to light the untold stories that inspire, empower, and urge you to discover your purpose so that you can craft your own success story. Welcome to the Greatest Story. I was honored to talk to a man whom I met not too long ago. He is originally from Detroit, Michigan, but now lives in Sacramento. He calls himself a deplorable, Easter worshiper, and a violator of community standards. He is married and has 2 daughters. Currently, he teaches apologetics and is very involved in the Sacramento community. So, without further ado, here is James Jenkins. When I met you at Pete's Coffee,
Yes.
I don't know, like after I left, I'm like, man, I would love to continue the conversation.
Oh man,
And then I saw you at the dinner in
that
Loomis.
made my day. That I have to say, seeing you made my day. Because I told my wife about you. Because I met so many people in different places that are gems like yourself, and you just start a conversation with them, and next thing you know, you're like, I met. There's a local musician named Jim Martinez. I met him like that. I can't remember what restaurant, but we started talking like across the table. And the guy was from Detroit, and I went to his not this Christmas, but he's down in Sacramento, and I got a lot of his music on my iPod now.
Oh,
and
wow.
he's a jazz pianist, kind of like, but he's a music director at Christ Community Church, I think it is, in Sacramento, I think it is. But yeah, and so I listened to a lot of his music, and it's really, really kind of jazzy, kind of. And some worship type of music that he does, and he puts on a concert usually at Christmas time. So
that's awesome.
Great pianist. So.
You're from Detroit as well.
I'm from
right?
Detroit, yeah.
Well, if you can talk a little bit about your background,
yeah.
What do you do? Yeah,
we're on.
We're rolling.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I'm up here yakking and it's on. So a little bit about my background.
Yeah, I know you're the oldest of 7.
I'm the old. You good memory. I'm the oldest of 7. I like I said, grew up in Detroit in the cold. I hated it, and I still do. I grew up in, I call it a ultra Christian environment, and so much so that my mother had signs all over our car, like
stickers.
Yeah, stickers and signs all over the side of our car. You know, God says, repent, John 3:16 on the back, things like that. And so it would be like, 100 below zero in the winter, and we had to walk to school. And my mother would go like, hey, well, I'm going to drive you guys to school today. We were like, oh, no, Mom, we'll walk. We'll walk. We were embarrassed to be seen getting out of our car. Yeah. But that's how what I grew up in. And big families. Back then, a lot of cousins, a lot of uncles and aunts and things like that in Detroit. I gravitated towards, well, first of all, my mother had me reading a lot of books when I was younger. Back then, they called them, they called them Black history books back then, but I call it history now because I think it's a part of American history.
Yes.
I was reading things like Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and things like that when I took a big interest in that. I was always been a big reader. So that kind of set some foundations, read Abraham Lincoln and things like that, and didn't think too much about politics back then. got to high school, one of the things I knew I wanted to do was become a professional baseball player. That was my passion. It still is one of my passions that I still do.
And that was all in Detroit? You went to high school in
this is
Detroit?
growing up in Detroit, yes.
Okay.
And so I did a little bit of college for a couple years and kind of wandered because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't making it in baseball, so I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to do. I'm summarizing some of this. Hit a low point in my life when I lost both my parents by the time I was like 22. And I couldn't sleep, so I ended up dropping out of school. I was back home, and the doctor told me I had high blood pressure and that you need to take this medicine. And I said, how long do I have to take this? He said, for the rest of your life. So this is the first time I went home and I read what was on a bottle of something. I have a cousin. I used to tease him because everything he bought food-wise, he would read everything. And I'd be in a hurry to go somewhere. I said, come on, man, we got to go. And he's reading everything on a box of cereal or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate.
That's when you were 22?
This is, right. Well, yeah, this is about when I was 22. So wow. I looked at that bottle and I said, there's no way I'm taking this stuff for the rest of my life. Look at all these side effects. And so I decided to join the gym. I joined the gym. I started working out. Stopped taking the medication when it ran out. And I looked at workout as my medicine and got myself in really good shape. Went back to the doctor. Nurse says, have you been taking your medicine? You know how you have a follow-up appointment? I said, no. And she started kind of railing on me. And so I didn't say anything. I just took it. And she put the cuff on me, took my blood pressure and said, took it again. She says, your blood pressure's down. She says, what are you doing? I said, I'm working out. She says, well, you better keep it up. And I says, that's my plan. So I'll be 65 in a couple of months, and workout has been my medicine of choice. And so I've been a gym rat, a gym junkie.
Wow,
so
I would never say 65.
Yeah,
you were great.
I'm a junkie, and I went into I started working out. I got a job at the gym that I was working out at.
Mm-hmm.
A few months later, going to the guys, say, hey, you should consider applying for a job here. I said, sure. So it was selling memberships. At the time, I didn't know diddly squat about selling. And so I was in a bookstore one day, like I frequent a lot, and I came across a great book. I just happened to open up the pages of it, and the words just jumped off the page and grabbed me. And I was like, this book is not just any ordinary book. This book is about like life, and so I got to have this book. And the book is called The Greatest Salesman in the World. I don't know if you've read it.
Is it by, who's the author?
Og Mandino.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So that book was instrumental. Once I finished it in 2 nights.
Wow.
So it was not only instrumental in finding out that, you know what, this is something that's deeper than me, and it's something that I can make my living off of, and I can be good at it because I love people. And so I dedicated my life to sales. It was also instrumental in guiding me back to Christ.
Wow.
And so I won't spoil the book for anybody, but it was only about 100 pages long. So I worked my way up in that company. I worked my way up to be a manager. I worked my way up to be an area manager, which moved me out to California. And I'm very proud to say I used to make sure everybody on my staff had that book. Wow. And I even get guys who I managed 35 years ago that worked underneath me that tell me, James, I still got the book that you gave me, and it's been instrumental, and you really helped guide my path and set a great example for me. Wow, so I'm very, very proud of that.
That's great.
A couple other things. I've been married for 27 years coming up not this Friday, but on the 16th, 2 days after Valentine's Day.
February 16th.
Yeah. I'll be married 27 years. My wife, Carrie, and I, we have 2 daughters, 23 and 26. Our youngest one is finishing up in May in music therapy down at UOP, and she'll be done. And so I like I said, been in sales all this time. Another big factor, I had a younger brother that used to started challenging my Christian faith when I was about maybe 15 years ago.
15 years
Yeah,
ago.
he started challenging my Christian faith with all these. He was about 10 years younger than me. He's passed away now, but 2 years ago. But he he was hitting me with all these things that I'd never heard before. Like, hey, the Bible has been rewritten 1,000,000 times. It's fake. Science have disproved all these things. Miracles are not possible. And I was like, no, it really is. And I realized the implication of what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So that led me to Christian Apologetics. And I started looking for answers in books like I typically do. And I read another book that really transformed my trajectory, which is by Dr. Frank Turek's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And a fantastic resource. That book, I still have the original, signed by the author Frank Turek, is worn out. And anyway, once I got that book, I started unraveling. It equipped me to unravel a lot of the things he was saying and show that they were false.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understood that, hey, you know what, Christianity, we're called to give answers in 1 Peter 3:15, 16, and do so with gentleness and respect. I had to always remind myself about the second part. When you imagine two brothers, eagles clashing, it's hard to do it in gentleness and respect.
Yeah.
So because of my sales background and my sales skills, apologetics kind of came naturally to me in that sense. God was equipping me. And so I actually went through a course in 2013 with the instructor of that book on teaching it. So I teach out of that book as my primary source for jumping off into apologetics. That led me to a lot of other authors and books and teachers that I adopted and started speaking for different other organizations, defending the life of the unborn, speaking on with Life Training Institute, Scott Klusendorf, who I seen debate down at Berkeley. So I started attending debates and all these things to understand all the arguments. So I encourage a lot of people I teach a class right now at the Point Church once a month on apologetics. And so
it's live.
It's live, yes.
Live. Nice.
And I try to help Christians and equip them to understand that what we believe is absolutely true, and that we have all the bases covered. And the Bible is true, and I teach them how to present evidence that the Bible is true, and it's led me into so many interesting areas and so many interesting conversations with people who are non-believers. One of the other things else it did as I grew in that area, and I'm still growing, and I still is always something to learn.
Oh yeah,
and you learn. Anyway, one of the things I understood with my brother was that at the end was, to my knowledge, he never came to Christ before he was actually killed. I say he passed away, but he was actually killed. But that's another story. But to my knowledge, he never came to Christ. But I understood that the things that he were presenting to me, these challenges, held no intellectual rigor or grounding. They were all built on sand, and I exposed them for what they were. And then what I was dealing with was not an intellectual issue. It was a heart issue.
It was a heart issue.
It was, an emotional issue. He was mad. He was mad at God. Once I peeled back the layers, it took years for me to do that. But now you have to, so in apologetics, you have to understand what you're dealing with. Why is a person, why are they railing against God? What happened? And so you got to ask them questions to peel back these things and understand where they're at. And so that took me to another level. But I understood it was an anger issue, because you got to remember, my father died at 19 and my mother died at 22. So he was 10 years younger than me. So that affected his life differently than it affected mine. So that led us into all kind of debates. We debated on politics. We debated on all these things. And so it was a sharpening of iron for me, and to get to understand all these things, because they're all intertwined, and they're what they call worldview issues, how you see the world.
Yeah.
And so those are the types of things that kind of got me where I'm at right now.
So James,
yes,
so when you are talking to someone, let's say maybe they're an atheist, right? Or they have something that's really pushing them to have this point of view that there is no God and stuff. How much is if you were to say, like, how much is it something that you can say and, like, bring a good discussion or some facts or whatever, or how much is it the Holy Spirit doing the work?
That's a great question. I think both has to be at work. I think the Holy Spirit starts in the preparation because what I found is I have to be prayed up and I have to be in the right state of mind. Otherwise, I start taking these things personal.
Mm.
And that's what I can't do. I have to be a seeker of truth. But I would say it's a little bit of both. Because again, you got to be armed with the Holy Spirit because sometimes they'll launch personal attacks at you. And so, and as a Christian, as a man who's filled with the Holy Spirit, I have to be seeing and looking at this from above the fray. For me, it's a search for truth. And so I don't let my ego get in the way because, I could be wrong sometimes. And I have to be willing to make the admission that, hey, you know what? You're right. I was wrong about that. And so they respect, usually most people will respect, you'll gain their respect when you understand when you're wrong, or that you know what? I don't know the answer to that question. That's a great question. And I don't know the answer to it. So I would say it's a little bit of both, but it also takes a lot of preparation because I spoke to a good friend recently, Paul, and he said, he's one of my best friends growing up. And we were talking, and he's in my neighborhood where I was at. I know his family, but he's trying to hang around the neighborhood guys. Great guy, by the way. But he's never dug into these questions, and he got the neighborhood guys because they know he's a Christian. He knows, and they kind of beating him up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to him recently. I said, I won't mention his name, but because he might listen to this, but he knows he knows I love him. But I started telling him, I says, look, you need to start getting a couple books, and these might be at this point in your life, these might not be the guys you might not want to witness to because they seen you at your weakest. Okay, so you might have to get and just start learning one answer a day, and go buy a book on apologetics. And if you learn one new thing about it, how to deal with one answer a day, in 1 year, you got 365 challenges to Christianity that you can be equipped to deal with. And I've got books on all these answers. I got tons of them. And I encourage people, hey, get one. Hey, what's the biggest question? After a while, there's the big questions that are tough, and there's the questions you hear every day. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you want to go here, but one of the big questions I think people have, and one of the toughest ones that Christians struggle with and non-believers struggle with, is why would a good God send like my mother? She was a Christian. She died at 42. So our family struggled with that one. Why would God take her, of all people? She trusted him, and she died of cancer at 42 years old with 7 kids. And why would God take her? And we have to be ready to answer that. And why does God take babies? Why does God take what happens to people who don't know God? The Bible has all these answers. Shall I share some of them with you?
Yes, absolutely. No, this is fascinating.
Yeah. So I'll deal with a couple of them. Examples. For instance, I start with a premise, by the way. The premise is, and we have it in Genesis, the world's broken, and so are we. And I told this to my friend. I said, so the world's not the way it's supposed to be. Even the atheist knows this. He knows it shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't have to watch my child die. And so we have to acknowledge that. I shouldn't have to watch my mother die at 42, who trusted in God. But if we go back to the original premise that the world is broken, and back to our Genesis, and sometimes we forget about these things, that is right, the answer is right in front of our face, and we read it a million times. Mm-hmm. So I put it in my terms, the world is broken. And then when they say a good person, well, according to the Bible, there's none good, not one.
But wouldn't they say, well, God created the world. So
Yeah.
why did God create a broken world?
Man, it wasn't broken in the beginning. It was paradise was lost and paradise was found. Genesis, God created, he saw that it was good. Man sinned, sin entered into the world, and we're suffering the consequences of the first Adam's sin. And it's paradise lost, and at the end, paradise is going to be found, and we're in the middle of that story. It's kind of the way I explain it. And I says, and we're all men are broken. So where are these perfect people? Where are these good people? And so all of us are broken. I'm broken. The only was one that wasn't broken, and that was Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
He was perfect. He died for our sins. So, and he paid the price for our sin. He's the second Adam, the perfect Adam. So I kind of explained it like that to him, and you know, there'll be some other objections sometimes that come up in between that, but
Sure.
And sometimes the other one is, hey, what about people who don't know about God? And I always say, well, Romans 1 has us covered. It says right there, it says, I'm paraphrasing if you don't mind.
Sure.
I should know it by heart, but it says basically God's revealed himself through the world. His invisible qualities are seen by the things he's made. His fingerprints are all over nature. But God wrote 2 books. He wrote the book of nature and he wrote the Bible. Okay. And they don't contradict each other. So we can see him, even if you didn't have a Bible, we can see, and in that section, it says, so that men are without excuse. So at the end of the day, you're not going to be sitting up there, God, I really didn't know about you. He's saying basically, and Paul and God speaking through Paul said basically, no, you don't get to use that as an excuse, because you can look at the stars and you can say, God, somebody did all this. What's behind all this? What's behind nature? What's behind DNA? DNA is a code. From all our known experiences, codes come from minds. It comes from intelligence.
Yes.
So his fingerprints are all over nature. You know, you have a mind. Where does it come from? Where does, you know, one of the other things that comes up sometimes is people go like, well, I don't believe in anything that I can't see, touch, taste.
Yeah.
And this is called materialism. And what's interesting is that statement is immaterial. So it's self-defeating. You believe in a statement that you can't see. Yeah, you can hear it, but you can't see it. It's a self-defeating proposition. So it took me apologetics took me in all these areas where I recognize when people say things that are not true, that they end up refuting themselves. If you say there is no truth, then I usually ask a question. Well, is that true, what you just said? And so by saying so, they're affirming that there is truth.
Yes.
So even the denial of truth is an affirmation of it.
This reminds me of a book. Have you ever read Power versus Force?
Not yet.
But David Hawkins. Oh my goodness.
David Hawkins?
Yeah. So
you have to give me that before we leave. Yeah.
He writes. So he was a PhD and he wrote multiple books. But this one is basically about levels of consciousness. So he starts with like calibration of 200, which is like low. No, not 200. Like 0 is where pretty much a person is like suicidal. Nothing you can say or do to help them get out of that. They're just done. Like and then 1,000 number is enlightenment. So he says that someone like Jesus, where he was just full of love, he wasn't afraid to die, you know, like he was like at the high, that's like the highest level.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And then everything is in between. The 200 number is the calibration for courage. So there is the power, he says power in the power category above 200 is the positive consciousness.
Okay.
The force is the negative consciousness.
Okay.
So things like bitterness, envy, regret, you know, all of this. So there's people, and when I was reading this book, there were some people that came to my mind who I know from my life that whenever you ask them how they're doing, they always respond like, could be better, or I'm alive, like as if though like they're just struggling. All this stuff is always happening to them. They're sick, right? Yeah. So he writes in this book that depending on which level of consciousness we live in, we attract these things because those things come out from us, we attract that. It's like almost like a law of attraction, but on a more deep. Like, it was really hard for me to read that book. Like, I had to like reread multiple things and stuff. So it was for me, it was mind blowing because it really opened up. And he says that the courage starts. That's the first positive level, which is 200, and that's where someone has enough courage to like take a step towards something, like do something, like begin to like change their life, their viewpoint, and then it's acceptance, and then it's a reasoning, acceptance, and it kind of moves on to all the way up to enlightenment. Very, very interesting book. So it was.
I'm going to do some research on it for you, Paul, to see what you got there. Yeah, I'm trying to catch the concept of it and relate it to.
Well, he's saying that truth. So there's this experiment that he talks about. They do. So, for example, like he has one person come out and stretch his hand out like this, and he says, "When I push it down, resist." Okay, so when he says something that is true, then the person like is strong. Like his arm resists pretty firmly.
Yeah.
When it's something that's not true, then the muscle becomes weak.
Interesting.
Very, very interesting.
So it transfers over to the physicality.
Yes.
It sounds like what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
I know. I'm still very limited in my vocabulary because English is my second language.
You're doing pretty good. Pretty well. Yeah.
So I'm not really able to like explain exactly like these concepts, but they were. I mean, I understood them enough to say, "Wow, there is something to this for sure."
Yeah. And truth is, one of the, when you understand Jesus being the embodiment of everything, every word that you think that's good, he is the embodiment of it, is really mind-boggling, and also is mind-boggling. Just throwing things out there to look at the things in nature that reflects his fingerprints, the intelligence. I don't know if are you familiar with the cosmological argument?
No.
I'll share it with you because I think it's important because it's basically one of what they call great. There's about three arguments, I call them, for that supports the existence of God, and as we describe them from the Bible. And the first one is called the cosmological argument, or the argument from the cosmos. And in Paul, it goes to something like this: everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. We know this from Big Bang. We understand this from the science that's come along in the last century or so, from Einstein to Hubble's telescopes, which has documented that the universe is expanding. So if you reverse it back, it came from what they call a singularity, and it came to being out of nothing. And so this is called a cosmological argument. So the universe, everything that began to exist had a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then you have to take a step further and say, what must that cause be like? And this is kind of like forensic science, or just looking at how it began and what the universe is made of. So the universe is made primarily of three primary things: time, space, and matter. So if time, space, and matter had a beginning, then whatever created it has to be outside of time, outside of space, immaterial. This sounds like the God of the Bible. Because he's time, but it could be the God of Islam, because there's only really three major religions that has a God outside of time, space, and matter. Most of them are pantheism or atheism, which is irrational. If the universe had a beginning, it had a beginner. Big Bang needs a big banger. And a big banger has to be bigger than what it banged. So anyway, I stole that from somewhere. But anyway, so now we got a timeless, spaceless, immaterial being. Now we start adding on to that. We can show that the universe has extreme complexity. For instance, they call it the Goldilocks zone. We just happen to be living in that exactly the right place that allows life to be to happen. And if we were 5% closer to the sun, we'd burn up. If we were 5% further away, we'd freeze to death. If the expansion rate of the universe was a minute fraction faster, we're not here. Slower, we're not here. There's a number, they call them anthropic principles, that says, DNA. DNA is another one. It's a code.
Mhm.
Codes, as we know, come from mind. So that whatever created this had to be timeless, spaceless, immaterial. Spaceless, immaterial. I'm talking too fast here. And I haven't even had coffee.
Hey man, you're already running in the overdrive.
You got me wound up here. But it also has to be extremely intelligent to create a code like DNA that's in all living things, the building blocks from it. And codes come from intelligence, extremely precise to create the universe so that life, it makes it just right for life. So all these factors are just right. If we live on a really fine edge, and the atheist, it takes more faith to believe that happens by chance or luck than to believe that an intelligent being did it. So, that's the cosmological argument, and you add onto it the argument from a design. A design needs a designer.
Yes.
So implies a designer. So and we're back to Romans 1. It says we look at nature. And I talk to people all the time, and some of them say, I believe in a higher being. And I said, do you know I said, I agree with you. There's a higher being behind this. I said, do you know how to know that that's true? And they go, no. And they go, let me tell you why. These are the things I explained to them. I says, this appears like the God of the Bible. And they go, wow, I never thought about it like that. Most people who are honest. And then we add that to the moral argument. Morality is hardwired into us.
Yes.
And the Bible states that, his law is written on our hearts. And for those that don't believe it, I always say, if you want them to confess it, all you got to do is do something wrong to them. And they will admit. And it's not just an opinion. Because if morality is not there, then it's just, we have just bumping around opinions that something is wrong. But they really know, if I steal your wallet, that you really did something wrong to me. And I can, if they're an atheist, I can say, well, come on, there's no God. It's just your opinion.
Yeah, it's just opinion.
Yeah. So these are not just opinions that we're talking about. And so you can get somebody to admit that something's wrong. That's the one way that blows the cover. And it's an argument for God. There's a moral law. Therefore, there's a moral lawgiver. And so I say it's hardwired right into us. So these are three of the great arguments that shows that God exists.
Yeah.
And you could step further, and I do this in a PowerPoint presentation that I do. You can step further now and say, well, okay, now we got a theistic God. A God is outside of time, space, and matter, to create time, space, and matter, and morality, and all this complexity we have. Now, which one is it? Is it the Muslim God? Is it the Christian God, or the Jewish God, which is the same God essentially? And so, and then we have to build onto it. Then we have to show that the Bible is true. I said, well, to show the Bible is true, where do we start? I says, we just got to show that the New Testament is true. And the reason we show that the New Testament, and I train students to learn that the New Testament is true, because if you prove that or at least lay the sound evidence that the New Testament is true, guess what? You get the Old Testament thrown in, because Jesus affirmed everything in the Old Testament.
Yes.
So I provide evidence that the New Testament is true. And so, and some of that evidence is, we have what they call the manuscripts. They're early evidence. These are evidence. These are what they call, well, I'm going to start back. Step one, take one more step back. What we have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
Okay. So when somebody says, well, I'll throw out an objection. These guys were biased, or whatever you want to say. You've heard it all. I've heard it all. But so I said, first of all, these are eyewitness testimonies. Oh, we don't know who wrote those, blah, blah, blah. They were written by somebody else. I said, well, they're either eyewitness testimonies or somebody who was dictated to, eyewitness. And I said, so what kind of evidence do you think, what kind of ancient evidence is what I typically ask a skeptic is acceptable? Because you can't have a Kodak camera that took pictures back then, and like the things we have today. So sometimes people, you got to show me proof or something like that. It says the best evidence we have from those times were eyewitness testimonies. What you have in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John are eyewitness testimonies to the resurrected Jesus and Jesus' life and his ministry of 3 years. So that's the best evidence you got. So these are all alliterations of E, so they make it easy to remember. And so these are eyewitness testimonies.
Yeah.
Guys who saw this happen. And they were what they call early testimony. These happened within the lifetime of the resurrection when they were written. And how do we know that? The reason we know that is because now I really need the coffee to get to my brain here, Paul. The reason we know that is because the destruction of the temple is written about, but is written about as a future event. And that happens in 70 AD. So if it happened, they were written after 70 AD, they would be looking back at the temple being destroyed. And Jesus prophesied, when he said, before this time period passes, he said, not one stone will be left on top of another before this generation passes, is what he said. So he's looking forward to that. So we know we have early testimony, we have eyewitness testimony, and we have things like embarrassing testimony. There's all kind of embarrassing testimony in the New Testament. And what I mean by embarrassing is if you were to make up a story, if this was a made-up story, would you leave in embarrassing details about yourself? I wouldn't.
No.
I'd be the hero.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what we find in the New Testament. We have and these are things that were pointed out to me, by the way, through reading the book I was referring to. And these are, so I give Dr. Frank Turk and Norm Geiser, who put this stuff together, credit for all this stuff. I just stole it. So just so you know, and I made it my own. But the embarrassing testimonies, we don't even think about. We read them all the time, and I read them for years and years and don't realize, like the women were the first ones to the tomb. Well, that's embarrassing. You look at things like, it's chock full of information, like the book is, like the number of times that Jesus said, "Oh, ye of little faith." They didn't get what he was saying many times. They doubted him even after they seen him risen from the dead. They, oh boy, it's so many pieces of embarrassing things that we don't even think about. That when I started reading the book, I said, "Wow, that is." And here's the thing: I always say, Christianity could have been over 2,000 years ago. Could have been ended 2,000 years ago with one little piece of evidence, one little small piece. You know what it is? I purposely stumped you here, Paul.
2,000 years ago. So that has to do with Jesus Christ.
His body, his dead body. If his dead body is found in a tomb, then Christianity is not worth believing in.
Yes.
So, and the reason that this is where the early testimony comes in is that somebody could have written or taken these writings of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John and said, no, these guys are lying. I'll show you where the body is at, and let's just end this crazy cult called Christianity right now. And it would have been over, game over. Yeah. And so so that gives us hope that Christianity is alive. And we know what would happen if his body was in the dead. It was in a grave. It would mean that he would be a false prophet, because he said he was going to rise from the dead. It would mean that he's along with Muhammad and everybody else, buried all the other prophets throughout history, Joseph Smith and whoever else you can name. So these are type of the conversations that I get into, and this type of evidence, and I go in deeper. So
I see your man. You're so good. I think I don't see how you can't convince somebody, that Jesus Christ is the Lord. And so, do you believe that America was founded on the Christian faith? Christian principles?
It was absolutely found on Christian principles. Absolutely. So another one of the books I came across, I'm a story of books that I came across.
Let's go.
here's a great thing too about apologetics. I told you about Dr. Frank Turek. I came across his book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That led me to other books, and that led me to Neil Momman's book called Jesus Was is involved in politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? When I read that book, it kind of got my head around where I should be politically.
Okay.
And not in the sense that it tells you who to vote for. It lays out the foundation of America, what you're alluding to, and it laid down the principles and why they are there and why they work better and than secular ideas.
Yes.
I need some coffee.
I want you to go a little bit deeper in that, because
Yes, please.
I've heard a point of view where church, community, and government are separate entities, separate parts of the whole universe, for example, or the world, and the role of the church when it comes to government, politics. Can you go into like how do you see that?
Thanks. That's a good question. I'm going to start down that road with saying that a lot of people. Well, I'm gonna do it another way. Our Christianity, unlike a lot of religions, we take everywhere with us. We believe God has a hand in everything, and that we are to be salt and light on this earth. And so there's some kind of way, I think bad ideas have gotten to church or Christianity. It says, we shouldn't be talking about these things because the government's area is over here. Give unto Caesar what's Caesar, and what give unto God what is God's. Well, guess what belongs to God? Everything. And so we have to have a hierarchy of what things are important. I think the first government that God created is the family. And
Yes.
I might be jumping around here a little bit, but I want to say that today we have a lot of churches that are afraid of jumping into the political arena or saying anything that relates to the political arena, in the sense of thinking we shouldn't be involved in these moral issues. Number one is abortion, for instance. But I want to back up for a second and just tell you a little story that might illustrate some of this. I was talking to a gentleman, and he in my gym, and some kind of way that becomes my missionary field a lot for whatever reason. God puts people next to me. I'm working out. We start talking, and he was a Christian brother, and we start talking, and he said that he was more on what are the issues we're talking about? And he said, well, I don't think that people who are Republican or on the right, I don't think they push against taking care of the poor, is kind of what he said. I might be paraphrasing
that
it a
the
little bit.
Republicans are pushing against taking care of the poor. Okay.
Programs that take care of the poor.
Yeah.
And so what I said to him, I said that I don't see it that way. I said, well, I see it as a difference between, I think both of us, if you're on either side of whether Republican or Democrat, or what do you want to call them, progressive or whatever, I call it conservative versus liberalism. But I said the conservative value is closer to our biblical worldview. I says, because what it says is, and that's what we believe, the church, the role of the church is to take care of the poor. It's not the government. And when I in about 3 minutes, I made a case for him, and he actually, to his credit, listened to me. I said, look, Christians and most religious people, giving is into our worldview. We are to give tithe, 10%, and offerings, things like this. We built cathedrals around the world. We built cathedrals here. We sent missionaries around the world, I should say. So if you tax us less, we'll take care of the poor. And that's a better way to take care of the poor. Over here, when you want to take care of the poor, the government wants to take care of the poor, they have to create an agency that they have to hire somebody
to oversee
it, to raise our taxes. And it's not really, now I'm really blanking out. All this lack of sleep is catching up to me. It's not really charity, because they're taking from somebody over here or wherever
By force.
by force and given it to somebody. The person who receives has an allegiance to a nameless, faceless, bureaucratic government. Over here, I think it makes a better citizen because the person who helped them off the street, who clothed them, who fed them, and was a good Samaritan to them in that sense, now they owe allegiance to the church and God as the one who picked them up and got them out of the gutter. So I made that argument. To his credit, he had never heard that. And so this is the design. So what we find today is we have an increasingly growing government.
Yes.
And it's pushed this area, and now the government has pushed into our domain. And even Christians are bought into the government doing. Hey, and if that's the case, I don't have to do anything but pay my taxes. I don't need to give. I'll give indirectly or let the government do it. So, but these taxes, if you think about them, I can tell you know this, they never go away.
No.
They're always there. I read somewhere,
Especially in California.
Yeah, thank you. And I read somewhere recently, Paul, that we're still paying for the New Deal back in the 30s.
In the 30s?
Don't run. Don't take that to the bank yet. But I heard that somewhere.
I'll do some research
I haven't
on
researched it yet, but they said some programs that we're still paying on, and from back, 80 years ago.
What about all this debt that it's piling on? And I'm hearing these point of views where our kids, our grandkids, they're eventually going to be responsible for this. Like all of this debt is actually going to be piling on them. I mean, it's a big problem. It's a moral issue. I'll put it right up there with a lot of other things. I don't think it's up there with abortion, but it's a moral issue. We're depending more on government, and we're just putting off something and chewing off. If you go by Proverbs, it has so much wisdom in it. You can't go wrong on these things. But we've dispensed with biblical principles regarding money, and we are. I mean, where this is going to go, I don't know. But I really believe that there needs to be a revival in this country. The Christians have to wake up. The Christians has to be, as Martin Luther King called, we have to be the consciousness of this nation. And we have a lot of Christians. There's a great book I read by Francis Schaeffer. I don't know if you're familiar with him, called A Christian Manifesto. It was written in 1982, and I read it late last year, and I couldn't put it down. I underlined a lot of things in it. But it was written in 1982, and he's talking about everything that's happening today. And there's been a humanistic worldview that's seeped into every area of our life, and it's creeped into the church even. And I even have heard pastors and leaders of churches say things like, well, I don't think we should be talking about X issue or this issue, or we're supposed to just stay over here in our lane. Meanwhile, government is all in our lane, all in our lane. And like you alluded to, every one of these things costs us taxes. And if we keep on getting taxed, we're moving closer towards what we talked about one of our earlier conversations, socialism, where the government owns every doggone thing, and they do everything for you. And this is what we're moving towards. And if the churches don't wake up and we don't wake up, I heard a statement that Pastor Farrington down at Destiny Church made this last Sunday. And it was a quote actually he gave from Mario Murillo, and I think he said something like, I might butcher this, but it said, Christianity can survive without America, but America cannot survive without Christianity. And Christians, in this book, Christian Manifesto, says that the reason the things are the way they are is because Christians have either been silent and not being the conscience of the country, and a voice out in the culture challenging
the lies, the things, and running for offices and getting involved, that we're going to have people who don't have that worldview and is more human-centered, man-centered than God-centered. And I'm not talking about a theology. I mean, a theocracy, I'm sorry. We're talking about Christian principles that are built underneath, guiding us to a better country.
Yes.
And so the founders, they were wise men. God were definitely guiding those men. They got it right. The further we get away from those principles, the worse we're going to be.
Yes. I don't know if you've seen this. There was this Wall Street article last year that was written, and I actually want to pull up this stat because this made me, I actually talked about it at my Rotary Club meeting. So the article said that America is rapidly moving away from the values that once defined this nation.
Yes.
So here are the 5 main things that it was written here about. So patriotism between 1998 and 2023. People who say these values are very important to them. So in 1998, 70%. In 2023, 38%.
That's a big
patriotism.
Jump. Yeah.
Religion, 62%, 39%. Having children, 59% versus 30%. That's 50%.
Yeah.
Community involvement from 62% to 27%. But the one thing that had increase as far as values, money. In 1998, 31%. 2023, 43%.
So when you say money, in what aspect is he talking about?
As far as probably
having it as a high value?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
Like considering these things, how you value them.
Okay, gotcha.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely going in the wrong direction. I know last time I read, our birth rate was down. When you look at the fact, if you don't mind, I'm gonna roll over a little bit to the even. I'll do the Black community, for instance. We've been about 13% of the population, comprise right over 30%, about a third of abortions. Since Roe v. Wade, 1973, we've aborted over 63 million babies, and so these things are playing a lot into Social Security. You think about it. We're running out of funding. Yes. Government took some money out of it a while back, but even so, we don't have people are living longer. That wasn't taken into consideration, but also we don't have the young people that's paying into it enough to support the old people. I do believe it's the greatest Ponzi scheme ever invented, by the way, Social Security, because it's really the more I look at it, the more problems I see with it as I approach the age where I'm probably going to get it. Think if God let me live a couple more years.
Well, isn't it supposed to run out like in 2037 or something like that?
It's running out. And you look at these factors that played into it. You look at, we have less kids being born for various reasons. We had the women's movement, destroyed the family values. We've had abortion. We've had, what else? The welfare state, where government was paying families to more money if a man wasn't in the home. So we have all these factors that play into, it's kind of like, I call it unintended consequences. When you mess with something, you think, I think about one. I says, why didn't God get rid of mosquitoes? It'd be nice if God got rid of mosquitoes. And I don't know what mosquitoes do, but I guarantee you, if we figure out what the benefit of having them, but I figure if we figure out how to get rid of mosquitoes, it'll probably throw the whole universe out of balance.
Yeah.
Because it's something that they do. I don't know what it is, but God has a plan for everything, I believe.
Well, yeah. Like when you buy a piece of property, and let's say if there's like a pond or a creek that's running through it, and like the environmental agency is going to get involved because they got to make sure that you're not destroying a mosquito or some other insect stuff. But speaking about the values,
yes,
there's this thought that I recently had, and I'm going to share this with you.
Please, yes.
Sometimes I look at what's going on right now, and I'm thinking, it seems like some people are just trying to destroy this country, the world. Like, why? What's going on? I'm asking myself, I'm thinking about it. And then this occurs to me. I'm thinking like, okay, so if they destroy these values where you don't believe that there's God, so you don't believe that there's life after death, if because of abortions and all of this LGBTQ this propaganda that's being pushed, you don't have any children,
That's another factor I left out, but yes.
then you don't have any future. So why would you care about destroying, or why would you care about making this world a better place when you know that once you are dead, there's no life?
You're worm food.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I've actually put that to people. I said, well, if there's no God, why should I be good? Why should I treat you with respect? Why is this wrong? These are questions atheists they can answer them, but they have really no basis for answering them because there is no reason. And the answer is, why should I care if I'm just dead when I leave here? But you get back to now, the apologetic question is, I tell people that, yes, I have a great reason for believing that it's life after death, because a man named Jesus, who is a historical figure that we know existed, one of the E's is extra biblical evidence as well. We have writings from outside the Bible, you just made me think about, that corroborates what was written in the New Testament. So we have a man who we have an eyewitness testimony who was dead 3 days and came back from the dead and is still alive. So he predicted it and he did it. So that's why I believe there's life after death. Why do you believe there's not? You have to deny that Jesus existed or there's something else that goes against that evidence. And I think the atheist is cornered if we do our jobs and demonstrate that it's unreasonable to say that the Bible and the New Testament got this wrong. So that's why I believe there's life after death.
Yeah.
And there's there's all these immaterial realities that we have as well that we can show that and demonstrate that we're not just physicality.
Yes.
Yes. And so even things like personalities, even dogs have personalities.
Yeah.
And so personalities, people have thoughts. We have dreams. Those things are they're immaterial. You can't touch them, taste them, feeling. You can experience them, but they're not material.
Yeah.
A thought is not a material thing. So we get all these things that we can say, where do these things come from? And so that leads me also to believe that there's evidence, that there's something we have that's more than just physical.
Yeah.
And there's morality. That's not a physical thing. It's an immaterial thing. So I look for opportunities to show that. And here's the other thing, Paul. Even if when we screw up, it's like, it's an affirmation of Scripture. Even when the atheists say, I'm not perfect. That's what the Bible said. That's an affirmation of that I'm not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not making an excuse for it, but hey, you're gonna fail, and make and do something immoral, and so am I. I said the difference is I got a Savior, and he's got me covered.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a higher authority than I.
Yes.
And when you have authority, you act differently. When you go back to the man in the home. I use another stat. You got me wound up here way too much. You're giving me the bully pulpit over here.
Sure, it's
you got a man in the house. You have a authority figure that if you do something wrong, he's got a belt that's got to straighten you out when you get home. That makes you act different.
Well, even that they're trying to take away, right?
Yes.
And the fact how many young kids right now are growing up or have already
Oh,
grown up without a father figure, I think that's
oh,
huge.
it's 75% of long-term prison inmates grew up without a father in the home. And somewhere in my phone, I keep a lot of those stats. But it affects everything from young girls looking for the love of a father that they didn't get, going all kind of places that they really shouldn't be, looking for that love that they didn't get as a little girl,
Mm-hmm.
causes them to do all kinds of things. You can go on and on and on about the fatherless, what do you call it, uh, uh, fallout from not having a father in the home. And it is, another factor I didn't bring up is no fault divorce, which Reagan signed. He says one of his biggest mistakes was signing that bill for no fault divorce. It used to be hard to get a divorce, and it
Yeah.
should be hard. Our society, if we want to get back on track, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be an uphill battle, and I almost think that what I see is I think it reminds me. You ever heard of the story of the kid who gets in the liquor cabinet and gets caught by his dad? Uh, it's kind of an analogy story. It's not something probably that really happened. It probably does
I think
sometimes.
I heard it, but go
But a
ahead.
kid goes in the liquor cabinet and he's sneaking, a drink, and his dad catches him. He's okay. You want to drink liquor? Go ahead. And he tells him to go drink it. And the
Mm-hmm.
kid gets sick and he throws up. And he goes, "Now, what of your lessons have you learned from drinking alcohol?" "Oh God, I don't want to do that again. I don't want too much of that." So I think there is that factor that's going to play into this equation that maybe we haven't figured it out. But I think we're starting to see some cracks. I'm going to go political here, if you don't mind, which is in this president we have right now. I think people are finally starting to realize, because I've heard him fight for the last 3 years and tell me about his health doing well, things about how the economy is doing well, Bidenomics are working, and all these things. And I go, wait a minute, I got inflation through the roof. I'm paying double for my gas prices. I'm paying for groceries. Look at all these prices, and you're telling me I'm doing well. And you keep spending, you're giving out these stimulus packages, which cause the inflation, and all these things are happening, and you're telling me we're doing great. My 401k has been down in the toilet, all these things, and you keep telling me I'm doing well. The world's on fire, and they blame the
Wars.
previous president. And I said, you know what? I said, and I said, wait a minute, hold on a second. I says, if this president didn't do anything, then I think you can blame it on the previous president, Donald
Mm-hmm.
Trump. I said, but he did. He did a lot.
I think on the first day.
Yeah, first day.
He just
Yeah,
the borders.
yeah. Open the borders, all these things. And so a lot of this is common sense, and I think a lot of people don't have it, and I think they end up getting their information and believing the news. Another great stat I heard is only 3.4% of the media is made up of Republicans. I don't know if you heard that in the
Oh
last.
yeah.
Yes.
And what about teachers too?
Teachers, I forget what that number is,
I
but it's
think
probably
teachers
really
and,
low.
and universities, that's like 90 something
Yeah.
percent of
Yeah. Eh,
so it's interesting. I thought like when our family came to America, it was 1993.
Okay.
Um I remember back in Ukraine, I was 8 years old and I have 12 siblings,
Wow.
but 3 were born here in America.
Yeah.
My parents had 10 back there in Ukraine. So we came to America, they already had 10
Wow.
kids. My dad was 33, my mom was 31.
Where are you at in this?
I'm third. I'm the
Third?
firstborn son,
Yeah.
but third. I have 2 older sisters. And I remember we would get together in a room and we would already know that we're going to America. And whatever we knew about America was based on what we heard, what we read, what our parents told us, what other people said. And in our imagination, America was this paradise.
Yeah.
Obviously when we came here, there was this shock because we came with nothing, just some bags of some stuff which we don't even
Did you come into California? When you
yeah, we
first
came
came?
to
Okay.
Sacramento. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And we had to pretty much start from scratch. But that's the risk my father took because he had everything in Ukraine. He had a property, just brand new house he built, brand new barn. But he saw, and he was against moving to America at first. And then as he was praying, he's a Christian man. Both parents were born Christian, Christian family. and they were praying, and then all of a sudden my dad changes his mind and he thinks, hey, there's going to be a better future for my children in America.
Yeah.
So that was the main reason why he decided to come here.
How old were you again when you came?
I was 8.
8. Okay, got
Yeah.
it. Thanks. Yeah.
So we came here, we had to start from scratch. My dad started working after a few months. So I remember we were getting welfare for like few months, right? We came, we don't have nothing, so we were getting like $700 or $800 a month in 1993. We're living in a 900 square foot home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. And my parents started buying like canned stuff, dry salami, packaging it up in boxes and sending it to Ukraine.
Wow.
And my dad was saving enough money for a van because obviously we all had to fit in some
car.
kind of vehicle.
The Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Bug.
So what I'm saying is when we came to America, like I remember like the way, and my dad also can attest to this, that America was different than what it is right now.
Oh yeah.
And we're talking about 30 years went by, and even like the way people were, how people were on the roads, there's so much that has changed. And I think that during this time, like the 90s, maybe even early 2000s, I think a lot of people they were doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
Things were calm. We had peaceful time. People were doing well. And I think that during this time, it's probably the time that really created, like there's the saying here that I wrote down: good times create weak men create hard times create strong men create good times.
I like it.
So it's like a cycle, right? And I think I'm looking at it and I'm thinking maybe that's what happened. Like we had all this good time and people kind of weakened, let their guard down. They were not looking into like, what kind of people are getting into the schools, universities. But there was a plan. There were these people that were like strategically going in there because there was a plan. And, people were asleep.
Yes.
And now, that time created weak men. And that's why I think we're up, I consider this to be a hard time that we're kind of facing right now. And I think, we're always like I'm a parent, right? We have 2 children, and we're trying to make things easier for our kids. We're trying to say, hey, you know what? We want you to have, better this because I didn't have this. So I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you a boost here. I'm going to pay for this. And sometimes I think, is this the right way to do it?
Yeah.
There's irony, like we want to make it easier and stuff, but we have to realize that making it easier and giving everything to them is not going to be a good thing in long term for them.
Yeah, I'll put a caveat on that. It depends on the kid too. But in general, I think you're dead point straight on as far as what you just said. It's dead point on. It's like I did a study, not a deep study, but a dive a little bit recently into the car business, being from Detroit, and what caused it to crash.
Mm-hmm.
Did a little reading, and it was a very similar story to what you just described. It's like the car industry in Detroit, being from Detroit, if you got a job at Ford or Chrysler or Chevy, it created a very good middle-class life for a lot of people in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was they got so top-heavy fat with executives that it made us easy prey for the Japanese to slip in and undercut and take advantage of it. Let's just call it that, because I think that what I read was the average in the 60s and probably through part of the 70s, the average per hour pay was like $20 per hour, $20 an hour for when you got in the factory. Well, Japanese were paying their workers $3 an hour.
Wow.
And so people wanted cheap cars, and Detroit got kind of fat, and so
Mm-hmm.
they had to compete, which is a good thing. And I think what you're talking about is, hey, like, give you a similar thing. Like, again, growing up in Detroit, I we didn't have a lot of money either, like what you're talking about, and we were in a 900 square foot house, but it was 6 of us, and my other little sister came along later to give us 7. But yeah, with 2 bedrooms, and my grandmother and so lived there as well. But anyway, when I wanted something, I had to go get it. I had to go shovel snow and knock on doors because we didn't have the money. If I wanted a new baseball glove, me and my brother, we'd get our shovels and get our boots on, and we go knocking on doors. Hey, Miss Jones, would you like us to shovel your snow? Yeah, just go out here and do it, and I'll pay you afterwards. You get your shovels, start shoveling. Well, we had another couple. They said, "Hey, don't even ask. Just when it snows, just come on over and we'll pay you." So that I delivered newspapers, I bust tables, I did everything, every kind of little odd job you could probably name, to stock boy in a grocery store, at corner drugstore. I did it all, and even when I first got out of college, I worked in a fast food restaurant for a couple of months until I started working at that gym,
Wow.
because that was the only job I could get at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So work ethic, a lot of people think they're owed something, and when you have that attitude, it creates an attitude of, I think, I'm gonna call it laziness. It might be a
Mm-hmm.
better word for it, but I'll use that term. But or complacent.
Mm-hmm.
The work ethic, it's I think it's still there for a lot of people, and I want to say there's still hope, because I think we're gonna hit a wall, and people are gonna realize it. And you know what? Like the kid who went to the liquor cabinet and got at his daddy's liquor,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Oh my goodness, I'm sick of this stuff." And you see it. I see some cracks in the dam of people breaking away from this form of government that keeps pouring taxes on top of us and trying to uh, do everything in our society. To places that we shouldn't be spending money, and on things that we shouldn't spend money on. This the student loan quote forgiveness thing. It's not
Mm-hmm.
really a forgiveness. I told somebody. I said it's not forgiveness. They're taking money from you and I who work every day, and they're paying off somebody else's debt.
Yeah.
And I said, and that should be, only the bank can forgive them. Only the bank, because that's who
Mm-hmm.
owes them the money.
Yeah.
I said, and what this guy is doing, when I say this guy, I mean this president is doing, the Congress already told him not to, and he's doing it. I know we're going all over the
Mm-hmm.
place here. But I said, what he's doing is actually taking my money to pay off your debt, and then he's trying to buy your vote with my money. And it's not really charity. I said, they wanted me to celebrate this. I said, I can't. A relative of mine, they says, oh, my friend had their debt paid off, and I says, I can't celebrate that, because the money has to come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's the deal. It has to come. Where is it going to come from? And that's a question that many people don't ask. And critical thinking, I think it'll lead you to a more conservative point of view when you start asking questions.
Yes.
Where does this money come from? Jump a little further, I'll say, even on the news, watching intake of news, people start asking, why is this playing on the news? Why is what I'm seeing important? Why is this important? And why is this issue the one that they're putting in front of me versus another issue? How did they decide that this is? And my take is, and I tell people that news exists on ratings. They know
Yes.
exactly what you want to see. And I tell people, usually on the opposite side of the political spectrum from me, I say, they know exactly how to play on your emotions. And they're going to play 2 things that we know gets everybody, most people, emotional about. Donald Trump. Let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to talk about racism in America as being a huge problem.
When I went to school, and I specifically remember 6th grade, my best friend, his name was Andrew Collins. He was
Uh-huh.
black. Man, he was such a comic. We always laughed. Like we would everyone was reading book, and we would sit down across the room, and we would look at each other, and we would crack jokes, and we would laugh. And I'm growing up, everyone is the same for me, right?
Yes.
black, brown, whatever race, it doesn't matter. You're a cool human. I love you. Let's go, And all of a sudden, like all of this is being like stirred up
Yes.
again. What do you think about that?
I have a lot of thoughts about it. That's a big old tee up for me there, what you said. What do I think about it? I think Martin Luther King had it right. He said we should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And that is, I think, a biblical perspective and the right perspective. And we've gone the opposite. And what's so ironic is seeing people with pictures of Martin Luther King on their walls and in their homes buying into this diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which is very problematic, and they're looking for what they call equity. And the difference between equity and equality, I don't know if you have studied this, but equity is giving everybody a different the same ending point, and favoring certain races because they're somebody in certain jobs or because of their race. And Dr. Frank Turek, I listened to his podcast a few weeks ago. He said something very powerful. Being a baseball guy, he says, today, if Jackie Robinson, who broke the color line in baseball, were playing under today's baseball under the equity versus equality program, let's say, or ideology, that he would get 4 strikes and 5 balls versus 3 strikes, which everybody gets. According to them, they would give him four balls. And they said, no, he played on the same playing field as all the whites and proved that a black man could play in the major leagues just as well, just as talented as equal. And so, no, don't treat me different than anybody else. Just give me the opportunity to compete. And that's equality. And we're not doing that. And I'm really glad that we got rid of affirmative action. I think it's a form of racism. And a lot of Asian people who, for cultural reasons, I guess, they study more, and they caught the short end of the stick when it came to that. And so now we've gone the opposite way, and we've gone back into racism. And I've heard all the arguments saying that, if it's not all white people are racist, or it's not racism if it's the other way. And if you favor somebody because of or disfavor them because of the color of their skin, it's racist.
How can you change that if somebody is at heart, they really don't like certain race, right? Like, how are you going to regulate that?
Well, that's a great question. It depends on how you're doing. First of all, I think it's a human racism is a human condition that reflects the fallenness of mankind. So we all are flawed, and some people's flaw is whatever racism. No, it's not right. It's a sin, I think.
Yeah.
To do that. So I think you can regulate it to a certain degree, in government and things like that. It's hard to. More difficult when you're talking about somebody's private business and how they treat their private business. But I think also that I think people are pretty smart in some sense. Maybe I give them too much credit. I don't know, but I think that people are pretty smart, and they know when they're being treated fair or not by a business or things like that. Now, there's some people also who they see racist in everything. Hey, you looked at me too long there, Paul. I think you got a racist streak in you. You looked at me, and everything you can find it in everything. And that's the problem I think we're at right now, where racism is in everything. You look at this lady, Claudine Gay, over at Harvard, how she was put in that position. And in my opinion, the case is that she should have never even been in that position of running Harvard. She didn't have the qualifications. And a lot of people cried racism when they asked her to step down as the president of Harvard University. I'm sure you
Yes. Yeah.
So a lot of people called racism, and somebody aptly pointed out, I think rightly so, that no, you got the job because of racism, which I totally agree with. I mean, she hadn't written she plagiarized so much,
Yeah.
and that she's still teaching African American studies at Harvard
Mm-hmm.
and making almost $1 million a year salary. So imagine sitting in her class, you're tasked to do a paper, and you toil for weeks, all night, staying up all night to get your paper in time to a teacher who plagiarized everything just about.
Well, now they
that
have
she
Chat
did.
GPT, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, oh boy, you're really.
All right, James. So as we land the plane,
Yes, sir.
This podcast is called The Greatest Story.
Yes.
And my thought behind naming it like this was, I thought about sometimes, when we are growing up, we read stories, we are being told certain stories, and then there are certain stories that we tell ourselves that can either get us in the right trajectory, upward or downward. And sometimes bad philosophy, like the women's rights, right? Like there's so many women that bought into that philosophy, and then they're 55, 60, lonely by themselves, no kids, realized, well, it's already too late.
Yeah.
So do you have a story, or maybe a couple stories, that something that really moved you? I know you told me about the book that you found at the bookstore that really changed your life. Is there a story that really had a huge impact in your life?
Ooh, boy, there's so many. True story or stories in general that I've read about.
No, true story for you, particularly something that happened.
I'll give you one that I think kind of defines a lot of about persistence about me. I told you about when I start working in the gym.
Yeah.
I didn't know diddly squat about sales. I was horrible. I was getting circles ran around me by these other guys outselling memberships. At any rate, my manager one day, I was dragging in the bottom and of sales. I was working my butt off, but I wasn't getting sales. So he pulls me in the office one day and he says, James, you're not doing too well. He says, so I'm giving you 2 weeks. You got to sell X amount of memberships in these 2 weeks, or else I'm going to have to let you go. I said, okay. So I work all day for the next 2 weeks. End of that 2 weeks, I'm not even close. I'm not even in the neighborhood. And so the gym wasn't open on Saturday. So Saturday night, I'm thinking, hey, he's going to let me go. And so we had to clean up the gym and put all the weights away at the end of the night. So we put everything away, and I says, you're going to let me go now? And I'm like, so he said, okay, fellas, have a good weekend. See you on Monday. Oh, he didn't let me go. He says, I'm coming back in Monday. So Monday, walk in. We got everything ready for the gym to open up. Sat down, had a little sales meeting around his desk. He said, okay, fellas, let's let the members in. They're out there waiting. Let's go. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's not going to let me go. Okay. I work all day. Sold nothing. End of the day, okay, fellas, see you tomorrow. I'm like, oh, he didn't let me go. I'm coming to work tomorrow. This went on for like 5 days. Every day. I came in on my off day, worked all day, 11 hours, whatever it was. Hardly anything. And then all of a sudden, that Friday, we used to give out what they call guest passes, invite their friends in. We'd give them a workout, train them, and then they would come back in. So that Friday, about 4 or 5 sales. Saturday, about 4 or 5 sales. And then they just start pouring in. And I tell people that because I worked my way up to be a manager in that company. And I used to tell people, I says, all I had to do was sleep in for 1 day and it would have been over. The irony of it is I ended up becoming my manager's boss. The other crazy thing, this was very uncomfortable because he trained me and everything. Several years later, I had to let him go. and that was really hard. But I didn't do it for revenge. It was just one of those things where they put me over him, and he wasn't really the same guy. Great guy. But I always talk about persistence, and I says that's the kind of drive and persistence you must have, and that you don't quit in the face. If you have a dream, you do not quit. You do not quit. You do not quit. It's like you keep battling. And again, at this point, I read the book, and I knew one of the principles of that book is I will persist until I succeed. I'll never give up. And so that was what drove me. But I say all it would have taken is one day where I said, you know what, I'm not going in. I'm going to sleep in. And I think that's kind of rare today. And I run into it sometimes. And when I see people with that, I love them. I say, your attitude is so refreshing to me. I mean, I have a goal right now, and that is to become the best 65-year-old baseball player in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I still play baseball.
I love it.
Yeah. So I
love it.
To do that, I have to play in a national championship was coming up, which I was a part of a winning team in 2021, which got me this World Series ring. It's an amateur World Series ring.
Wow.
So that's one of my goals, is to become the best 65-year-old baseball player in the country in this tournament that I have to play nationally coming up in November. So
that is amazing.
I think you got to have goals. And those goals drove me. I said, I didn't want a life of poverty. I didn't want a life of like what I grew up in. That drove me. And, so I read all kind of books. When I decided I was going to be the greatest salesman in the world, I was going to be the best at what I did. I went to seminars. I read books. I have a book collection today. I'm always reading something. And I tell people, I says, you know what? If you dedicate yourself, well, first of all, let me back up for a second. Things got even better when I put God first in my life. I still hit bumps, absolutely, but I can deal with the bumps because you know what? I see the end. I have the end in sight. I know, God forbid anything happens to me, I know where I'm going. I know exactly where I'm going. So I would say that is one of the stories that probably I look back on and think, hey, look at all the people's. You've seen the movie "It's a Wonderful Life."
Yes.
It's fantastic.
We just watched it this Christmas.
Yes, I can watch it a million times.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway,
they used to make great movies.
Yes, I think about that movie, and I think about, and I think sometimes it's one of those things where, and I don't say this to brag on myself, but I think God used me to touch a lot of people's lives. I really believe that, and sometimes you don't know it until somebody whose lives you touch tell me. And I go, like, I even had one of my ex-workers, a guy I used to work with, actually just a couple years ago. He goes, we talking, we hadn't talked in a couple years. He said, James, you're the one who taught me this and taught me this and taught me this. I said, really? I had that big of an impact on you? He said, yeah. He said, you did, man. He says, we only worked with each other for about a year, and so I left some things with him that, it was a horrible job, by the way. I won't name the company, but it was a horrible job, but but apparently something good came out of it, and God can cause something good to come out of anything.
Oh, yes.
How much time we got?
Well, if you want to share something else, please do.
I'll share one more. This is not a story about me, but it's a story that I read in a book called Unstoppable. If you haven't read it, this is one particular story in there. It's a true story that every time I tell it or I read it, it not only inspires me, but it might get me choked up. So bear with me for a second.
Okay. Do you know who's the author?
Her name is Cynthia Kersey. Kersey. Okay. It's 45 stories in the book about people who had what they call what she defines as an unstoppable spirit, and people who done amazing things that were overcoming insurmountable obstacles that we don't even dream of. Mm-hmm. And there's one particular one about a little boy, a boy in Africa named Legson Kayura. It's a true story, found in the 50s. And he had missionaries coming over to Africa, and he lived in a very poor village, and people made excuses for poverty and things like that. And he got inspired by some of the missionaries that were coming over to his village. And so he had read stories about Booker T. Washington and a lot of the greats. And he decided when he was 16 or 17, he didn't even know his age because he didn't have a birth certificate or anything like that. But he decided that he wanted to be like one of these, like Booker T. Washington, and he wanted to be and make an impact on society. He had to come to America to get a first-rate education. To get to America, he had to cross over 2,000 miles walking and then get plane fare. And so he decided that he was going to leave home and he was going to walk. And so he started walking, and after a month, I think he had went about 30 miles or something like that. He got sick. He had some people had to take him in. A village took him in and nursed him back to health. He would work, get a little job in the town, and he'd walk further. It took him 2 years. He walked to he walked, I think it was to Egypt. He walked all the way to Egypt from his country, 2,000 miles. But it would took him a while. He would stop. He would write letters. He would get a little job bussing tables or whatever, write letters to schools in America. He saw this one school. He really liked it. Now, when he got to Cairo, he didn't know how he was going to get to America. He had no plane fare. He didn't have anything. By the way, he had reached out to the missionaries and they helped get him his birth certificate and some other things. But unbeknownst to him, see, I'm starting to get choked up. The first school he wrote, because he had a budget, he was sending this first school he wrote. The students heard about his story. They raised money, got his airfare. So he came over, got his education, became a PhD. He's passed away now. But how do you walk 2,000 miles? All these strange villages, you don't know them. And at what point do we give up? We get a hangnail and we're like ready to go home and jump back in bed. I mean, wow. You talking about, I read that, you could tell I'm getting choked up by it. That story moves me every single time. Amazing. Wow. It's like, we don't know how good we have it. Even under all these things we're dealing with right now.
Yes.
The obstacles. Can you imagine 2,000 miles? He didn't know how he was going to get to America once he got to Cairo. But these God put other forces in the action that caused them to make it happen and finish his journey for him, or completed a big part of his journey. But if he would have stopped at any point, he doesn't live out the dream that God put in his heart and in his mind and in his soul. Yeah,
that's an amazing story.
This is a lot of stories. For whatever reason, that story just, I go like, oh my God. I don't have anything to complain about. Yes, this guy slept outside underneath the stars on his journey. It's called The Walking Ulysses, is what they name it in the book.
I will check out the book.
So that's those kind of things really
awesome.
They move me. So
well, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah,
James, how can people follow you? Where can they look you up?
I would say the best way is to. I don't have a website or anything like that yet, so I'm sorry. I haven't built all that stuff. And I would say the best way is to pop me a quick email. I'm on Facebook as James Jenkins. Under my the moniker, if you want to follow me on there, it says deplorable Easter worshiper and violator of community standards, because there's several James Jenkins you'll see on Facebook.
Okay.
That's probably the best place if you want to email me. I'm JJMinota, like the old cameras, at hotmail.com. So I'm pretty simple, straightforward. I love to talk to people and make friends everywhere I go, just like we did.
Thank you so much for this.
This has been a pleasure for you to wind me up and let me go.
James, it's an honor for me. Thank you so much.
Man, thank you.
I appreciate it.